To our fifth LoadTrek Learning Academy. Today we're going to be covering prepping for payroll. And this is going to be the basics on how to get your routes, your trips ready, get the information in there correctly in order to be set for the jump off period to go into the payroll processing period. So what we're going to talk about today is the plans, which, I guess which way you want to go as far as entering the plans into LoadTrek. We're going to talk about in the plans, the actual versus the bench versus the plate, time card setup, company settings, which would be best for your particular situation. And then also, we're just going to touch again quickly on driver groups, because that's really important when it comes to the validation process and payroll processing, keeping things organized. So the first thing I'm going to do is I will share my screen with you. All right, everybody see that? Okay, great. So we're going to talk about the plans. The plans can be two different things. Growing up with LoadTrek, we always used to put the exact plan from the postal contract plate here in the system right here. And really what this would account for then would be the time of arrival at the first post office to the time of departure of the last post office. It did not include any portal time, break time, fueling time, anything to that effect. What we've learned over time in working with our LoadTrek customers is the fact that we actually highly recommend that we look at it in such a way that the plan that we put in there is what we expect to pay the driver to do that trip. So we're going to want to include the drive time to and from where the vehicle is parked to the first and last stop. We're going to want to include any paid break time if you live in a state where that is required by law. You're going to want to include any kind of fuel stops. So all of that, you wanted to have that taken into account, and I'll explain the reason for that, why, in a few minutes. But for right now, just to show you the difference, this right here is going to be an example of really the times that it's going to take from the first stop at Truck Country into Forest at 5:45 in the morning to when that driver is scheduled to be out of Truck Country to Forest at 10 a.m. So the plan truly calls for the driver's actual time working for that customer, 4 hours and 15 minutes and 210 miles. So that is what we would call a plate plan. The second example I'm going to show you is what we would call more of the all-in plan, where it's going to include the driver's drive time from where the truck is parked, and that would be here in Waterloo, Wisconsin, going to DeForest, Wisconsin. It's going to include the drive time back. This driver, it's a short trip, doesn't fuel, doesn't take any breaks. We were able to calculate that it's going to take the driver 5 hours, 42 minutes, and it's going to take a whole 258 miles, 258.6 miles. So again, this is what we expect the driver to be paid for this particular route versus what the driver would do from the customer location just to customer location. The other thing I wanted to point out was when we have trips where there's two different drivers running two different segments. One thing that we have noticed working with customers is that sometimes the miles and the time allowance is split straight down the middle, when in fact one driver perhaps works a longer amount of time on that contract and drives more miles. So you definitely want to be more cognizant of it, because it's going to change what the driver's allowance is going to be on their time card. So here, driver one, who's going from Wisconsin Spice to Waterloo to drop it at the yard, is 2 hours, 45 minutes. Driver number two, who's going to be taking it out to Iowa, is going to take 5 hours and is going to be driving 200.7 miles. And some of our longer distance mail contractors mail contracts have trips that are broken up very similarly. You might have a driver in a highly congested urban area driving a smaller distance may take a little bit longer, but then another driver taking the trip to the next postal location, maybe taking it more miles, definitely more time. So use all the technology you have at your hands, Google Maps, etc., to determine what the time and the miles will be for each driver that's on a particular route. Second thing I want to talk about then is our actual time card. So I can explain to you what the difference is between the actual versus the bench versus the plate. And I've got to switch my screen again here. So just give me a moment, please. All right. Okay. So these are the time cards that you would see if you were validating your driver's routes and time cards in payroll. So to show you real quick. Okay. This here, for example, is an example of the driver that has a plate plan. So you've got the plate plan of the 4.25 hours. The benchmark, as I said, is going to have the origin and destination added to it once the route has been assigned to the driver. So that's where you get the 5.7 hours. And in this case, it took the driver 7.48 hours to complete that trip. Second example I'm going to show you then is what we would call where it's the plan what you expect to pay the driver. So in here we've got the 5.7 hours as the plan, the bench is 5.7 hours, and the hours actual is 5.98 hours. And remember, a benchmark is the ability to evaluate or check data by comparison with a standard. So always remember, the standard is the plan, the bench will be the comparison. And what I mean by the bench will be the comparison right here, the bench was going to show you different hours if a driver, for example, delivers mail perhaps out of order, goes to different stops. If the driver stops and takes a longer break than you had already expected, it's going to reflect that. It's going to flag that for you immediately. And then you can, based on your company policy, determine what steps to take from there. So again, that's why we do recommend that you do the plan, as what you expect to pay the drivers themselves. All right. And then going to review here as far as the actual time card setup. So there's user settings and company settings. The company settings, you see that? Okay. The company settings supersede user settings, but we do recommend everybody have the same. And also, as far as setting these up, most of the companies have permissions given to the payroll managers, operations managers. But just so you understand the difference between them, as far as payroll type, right here in the upper left-hand corner, there's route-based payroll, and then there's DOT-based payroll, and there's advantages to both. Route-based payroll, a couple things, it does require that a route be assigned to the driver, and the driver must execute that route. That's the only way to have a time card get produced from the driver's route. So there has to be a log, there has to be a route assigned, and it has to have a driver execute the route. DOT-based payroll here, on the other hand, is truly just needs to have the driver log. No route needs to be assigned to the driver. The advantage to that is that you're always going to get a time card. The negative to that is that you aren't going to have any benchmark to compare it to. You won't have a standard to hold the driver with. So that can be a little dicey. Other things to talk about here, select the validate by the validate date or the route date. Other options that you're going to want to see on here, we've got discount the log off time and discount sleeper time. That would be anytime the driver has a duty change to log off or sleeper, the driver would not get paid for that. Some of you may actually pay for drivers when they are in the sleeper berth. So again, this is a company decision. You're going to want to have the print bench, print planned, and the actual hours. You want to have those checked off because, oops, that's the only way to get these three elements here on the time card so that you can make that side-by-side comparison. And then apply exceptions, bench, actual, and planned. That's, again, a company decision. That's going to be based on exceptions of having late slips, 5500s. We've got companies that use shuttles, exceptions for shuttles, that type of thing. And that's something that we would cover later on in a more advanced learning academy for customers that are, getting ready for that jumping off point into payroll processing. Okay. Last but not least, want to talk about driver groups and just reemphasize the importance of having the driver groups set up prior to going into the payroll processing. It's important if you've got two separate payroll cycles. So driver group A is paid on week 1, driver group B is paid on week 2 for a biweekly pay cycle. It keeps everything much more organized. And especially the larger the company, the easier it is for organization, and especially if driver managers are responsible for getting the last look at that time card prior to payroll to ensure that proper payment. Say that 5 times fast. Okay, so that is it for the Learning Academy for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at questions@loadtrekservices.net. Otherwise, we'll hang out here for a few more minutes in case anybody has any questions. And I thank you all for attending today. Thank you.